Okay, so let's take a look. We are starting day one of PFT 110. This is one of our program design classes. This is program design for principles of weight management. So the idea here is that we are talking about particularly how to design programs that are like really high calorie burns. But along the way, we are going to kind of review some of our physiology lessons. But the focus is definitely going to be primarily around, how do we create energy deficits, right? Or if we're trying to gain weight, right? And that's the other thing that this class can kind of be applied to is like, well, what if I'm trying to like gain weight, right? Well, then we just need to kind of create that energy balance in the opposite direction, right? So that's really what we're talking about here. Like, what types of programs can we design that sort of fit in with the energy demands that we are trying to create, right? So we will talk a little bit about physiology there. We'll cover some nutrition strategies, although it'll be much less based on like micronutrients, macronutrients, and the biology of those things, and much more based on like, hey, how to control your portion sizes. Like, what are some tips for making sure that you're not overeating? How do you manage your hunger levels and things like that? We'll also talk about like the psychology of weight control as it relates to habits and things like that. Then we'll get into the very much like the program design stuff. We'll talk about fitness assessments, training methodologies that work for particularly calorie burns. How to avoid and break plateaus is actually one of my favorite talks because weight loss plateaus are one of the most kind of brutal, I think, in a couple different ways. Like, they're brutal in the sense that almost everybody struggles with it at some point. And they're also brutal because like psychologically, they're one of the most frustrating types of plateaus. Like, I find that like, it's always frustrating when you can't get a lift. You've had like some progress in like a lift for a little while and then like kind of stagnates for a little while. That's frustrating, but there's nothing more frustrating than like when you're trying to look or feel a certain way and then it kind of slows down. So we'll talk about like how to break those things. On that's actually a relatively short chapter. So we're going to pair it up with another day, which is another relatively short chapter about talking about weight management myths. It's one of my favorite days because it's just like, all right, let's talk about stupid diets and how we can debunk them. So I really like weight management myths. It's a very short chapter, but it's also like close, near and dear to my heart because I like ruining dumb fake science. So we'll talk briefly about that. Then we're going to get into our weight loss programming application where we really will kind of dive into actually writing programs. And then we will have our training session practical. In this class, that training session practical is basically going to be writing one total body workout that you could do a couple times a week. But then we're going to lay out like what that weekly lifting schedule is, what a cardio schedule is, talk about some diet strategies, and then any other coaching tips that we can do, like setting your client up almost with like a packet, right? Like, hey, here's what I want you to adhere to. We're going to be in contact. You're going to lift 3 days a week, but on days that we're not meeting, you're going to do your cardio and flexibility training without me. So we got to make sure we teach you those things. It's kind of cool. It's very much about the coaching process in this mod. So I really like this. This is one of my favorite little projects. It's almost like the soap notes actually in a way. How you're writing kind of like a structured plan for those of you who remember soap notes. So that's kind of where we're headed here. Let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to knock out 2 chapters tonight, one PowerPoint in like 2 chapters. One of the things I do need to send you guys, this is another one of what we call our packet classes, in the sense that like there is no physical textbook that exists for these materials, but there are PDFs. So I'm going to send you those PDFs, and then I'm going to send out an email with a list. Anybody who wants those PDFs printed, let me know, and you can have like a physical copy. I think that's always handy to have. And at the same time, like for those of you who are like, nah, man, I'm a millennial, I got my phone. That's also okay. You don't have to have a physical copy, but if you want one, I want to make sure you get it. Speaking of, Maggie, did you ever go pick up your PES book?
No, I ended up sending a check last month and I didn't get a chance to get over there.
Well, there's going to be an email from Sochi this weekend, I think, or maybe next week. So you'll get, we are getting some news coming down the pipeline about like location like change. So we'll make sure that we coordinate like how to get you that book, you know?
Okay, I think there was 2 books. There was a senior and there was
Oh, that's
something
right.
else.
You never got your senior packet either.
Yeah. Well, I just need it before,
Yeah.
we finish up so I can go through and read it and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. I mean, we have, like I said, like you've got the digital copies, but
yeah.
the printed copies are so nice because you can,
Yeah,
sit in a
definitely.
chair and read it out.
Yeah.
So this is another one of those classes, right? We got four of those classes, 4 packet. All of our program design classes are packet classes, and we got 1 extra one. So a lot of your homework in this class is going to come from the PowerPoints. Your finals are going to come from the PowerPoints, but it is always very, very helpful to actually read those chapters. You're going to notice that I'm saying everything that's in those chapters, but there's just something about like reinforcing that information. And really, it only takes about 30 minutes to go through them. So I'll make sure that that goes out in our overall email today as well. Okay. So let's go ahead and dive into the PowerPoint part here. So we're looking at chapter 1 here, which is going to be the obesity epidemic. So we're talking. This is that. I will say this is that classic. I always do this whole spiel whenever I talk about packet classes. But this is that first chapter of every packet where NASM always justifies the fact that you just purchased this like certification. And so like we're going to talk really briefly about just like how common obesity is and why there's a need for personal trainers who know how to kind of address that obesity. So our learning objectives today is to have an understanding of the overview of the obesity epidemic and how it has certain effects on society. We'll be able to understand the difference between like overweight and obese, which I'm pretty sure everybody in here has a pretty darn good understanding of. Considering that we've talked about BMI so many different times. We want to understand of like the reasons why obesity has grown, statistically how it affects both adult and youth populations, and all the negative effects that are associated with it. So as an introduction here, obesity, we do know that it has been linked to several different diseases, everything from coronary heart disease, hypertension, type 2 diabetes, high cholesterol, increased types of cancers, and even depressions due to like hormonal imbalances and things like that. So we definitely know that like obesity is something that we want to address from a health standpoint. But I love this. I love that they add this in here actually. But there's also like a financial burden of obesity, right? The financial burden of obesity is approximately 147 billion per year by 2008. That's crazy, right? Like that's a ton of money. Think about like that's people spending money on diseases that they have that could have been prevented, right? But at the same time, it's also money that has to go to like people who are taking sick days. So then companies have to like spend money paying another employee overtime to kind of pick up the slack while so-and-so is off sick. And then that ends up like costing that company money, which then like raises the price of goods and services. And then like we all kind of pay for it. And so it's kind of an interesting like topic to bring up actually. Like we're seeing like estimates around $78.5 billion per year just in 1998. That's a huge difference, right? That's doubled in just 10 years. And now we're even further beyond that. So we're seeing that approximately we've got about 69% of the U.S. population is currently overweight or obese. I know those statistics may actually seem a little high, but remember, like we're also including people who are in the overweight category. And remember, all of this is based on just BMI alone. That's actually what's so brilliant about BMI. Like I don't like to use BMI as a predictor of health, but I do like to use BMI in like when we're looking at large scale populations, because people who have elevated BMIs that are healthy are generally the minority. So it is a pretty good way to look at like a large population and be like, this is the area where we need to kind of address and like, do more fitness and nutrition workshops in elementary schools and start talking about like healthy habits from a younger age. So that's the kind of thing that like BMI is good for. Is it good to like say, oh, my BMI is outside of normal ranges, I must be unhealthy? That I don't like. You've heard me rant about that before. But anyway, so we're seeing, basically 70%. I mean, that's nearly like 3/4 of the population. So really quickly, we're just going to go ahead and knock this out again. So body mass index. I know that we have this in our notes so many times, but it is or BMI, is a common method for categorizing, good Lord, categorizing individuals based on a calculation of their height versus weight. Okay, and so BMI. I mean, you know what? I want to be smart here and not have to remember how to do that thing, and I'm going to copy and paste. So body mass index is going to be your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters squared, right? And so all of our different categories that we've got, we have got underweight, which is, I'll put that over here. That is going to be a BMI of less than 18.5. Got to make sure I get those freaking brackets in the right place because I've screwed that up a million times. We've got normal weight, which I love to put in parentheses because what the heck is normal? That is my dad's favorite phrase, by the way. I constantly make fun of my parents. I'm like, you're not being normal. And they're like, what is normal? I'm like, you hippies. I'm kidding. That's going to be a BMI of 18.5 up to 24.9.
They have a good.
What's that?
I said they have a good point.
Yeah, no, totally. They very much do. And they're not so much hippies as much as they are like hillbillies. My parents take deep pride in the fact that they are beach billies because they don't live in the hills, they live at the beach. And they love to go onto the beach and like find garbage and then bring it back to the house and decorate with it. They're like, look at all these new floats we got. I'm like, yeah, you had tons of floats. Great, the house looks like a boat. Cool. We've got overweight, which is a BMI. This is going to be a BMI of 25 up to 29.9. And then we have obese, which is going to be a BMI of greater than 30.0. So these are our body mass index, right? Now, we got a couple other ones here we are going to see. We've also got like obesity class 2. So I'm going to put this over here. These are special ones that really you really are going to only see in some pretty severe cases. But we have obese class 2, which is going to be 30 up to 39.9. And then we have obese class 3, which is pretty extreme, which is going to be that anything greater than 40. So now we've definitely, you could possibly you could definitely have clients who fall into these categories here. Like I said, the heaviest client I've ever had was, I think, 520 something pounds. It'll happen, you know. And in cases like that, this is where kind of understanding like the rules of weight loss, not only from like a physiologic standpoint, but also from like a behavior change standpoint, become really important. And so that's really what this certification is kind of built around, right? Like a lot of times we think of like somebody who has weight loss goals, we're thinking of somebody who might be a couple pounds overweight, or, you know, maybe just wants to look better on the beach, you know? But in very extreme cases, you're going to run into people where like this is the #1 priority in their life. Like there are so many diseases associated with like extreme obesity that like our #1 priority is to simply create some type of negative energy balance. And so, you know, is it important to make sure that you're getting plenty of vitamins and minerals? Yeah, of course. Is it important to make sure that you are not overtraining? Of course it is. You know, all of these things are still true, but like the emphasis where like, you know, it's almost like, is it time for caution or is it time for like extreme measures? Well, you're in a pretty extreme situation. So a lot of times, you know, your priority is not so much on like, yeah, I love squats. I think they're the most important thing in the world. But if your client can't do them, and it's just simply better for them to walk, great. We will take it. We will take any type of activity we can get. I've talked about this before, and I don't think it's a very great documentary in terms of like, I like as somebody who understands nutrition, do not get your nutrition information from this documentary. But as somebody who like enjoys documentary films, if you ever get a chance to watch the movie Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, it is awesome. And it's really awesome for really one or two key moments, particularly where like the documentary starts off with this guy who, by the way, like owns the company, the juicer that he's trying to like sell. So it's very clearly like, you know, propaganda. But he goes on like an all juicing diet. He basically does not eat anything and just does juicing, and that's where he gets all his nutrients from, and relies strictly on adipose tissue for like calories. So he loses an incredible amount of weight pretty darn rapidly. And he goes around like half the documentaries is just him trying to find somebody else who'd be willing to do this with him, where he's like teaching people about the benefits of juicing. People are like, no, we're not interested. He finally finds one guy who's like a truck driver who is like way over 500 pounds. He's extremely heavy. And he decides to like start this program. And so he like flies out to meet this guy, and he starts encouraging him to exercise and all this. And in the beginning, when that guy's story like first starts in this movie, they're like, all right, well, let's start by doing your first piece of exercise. What do you think you're able to do? And he's like, oh, I don't know. I might be able to walk a little. And he's like, great. How far do you think you can walk? And he's like, let's try maybe to the mailbox and back. And it's like, that's his entire workout. Like, he gets up, he gets off the couch, he walks to the mailbox, he walks back, and he sits. And like, he is wiped out. And it's amazing. I mean, it's incredible because like they finished filming that whole thing before the truck driver guy was finished with his journey, but they do go back like at the end with like a little bit of extra footage, and they're like, we want to check in on so and so and see how he's doing. But I think he's in like Wisconsin or Milwaukee or somewhere just incredibly cold, and it's like the middle of winter, and you see him like strap on a jacket and like some running shoes. The middle of winter, the whole town is snowed in, and he goes out for a run in the middle of a freaking blizzard because he's so dedicated. And now he's like literally going for a jog. And I just remember like the first time I like watched it alone, like while I was like meal prepping, and I just remember being like, oh my God, I'm not even making onions. Like, it wrecked it. I mean, it's incredible. So like, if you get a chance, I don't know, maybe just watch that clip alone. Because like I said, like the scientifically, but as a movie, it's a great movie. And so like a lot of times, like that is the type of person we are talking about when we talk about like extreme obesity. And so that could be your client, which is, so we want to have an understanding, because here's one of the hardest things about that. I think that one of the things that makes a good weight loss trainer is having an understanding of how this person developed this lifestyle, right? First, we're going to talk about thermodynamics in a little bit. And that's kind of goes down to like that whole thing that I always talk about, which is, nothing gets the way it is unless it was designed to get that way. But a lot of times, like understanding how this person's life was designed to get this way is sort of a key thing. And I think that sometimes like trainers who have typically been in a certain type of shape their entire life sometimes lose perspective on that. And so we're going to really quickly go over some of these causes here. So what are some of the most common causes of obesity? Common causes of obesity, right? We are definitely going to see things that are environmental, certain things that are like your lifestyle oriented, and certain genetic factors, right? So like environmental is huge, right? Depending on like where you grew up is absolutely a huge one, right? Environmental factors.
And sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah, right? Like where you grew up, what you were exposed to, etc. Like I grew up, like I said, like I've said this before, I was blown away when I got to college and was learning about digestion and found out that lactose intolerance is more common than being like non-lactose intolerant, like being able to drink milk. Like that blew my mind. Like, because I was like, no, everybody drinks milk, right? Like everybody. But like, I went to school in like a larger city from the tiny ass town that I was from. full of, a bunch of people like me. And then all of a sudden I was exposed to like a bunch of other different cultures, and people were like, no, man, that stuff tears me up. And I was like, what? And it blew my mind. But that's like part of your environment. So like, mac and cheese, chocolate milk, all of these like things that I grew up eating that I like thought was like, I was told was like healthy because there's so much calcium in things like milk, right? All these things that I kind of grew up thinking were like incredibly healthy, I come to find out can be, very detrimental. But also like milk is full of a ton of sugar and saturated fat, which clogs our arteries. Like there's a million, drawbacks. There are some positives as well. Like don't make no mistake. This is why food is so complicated. It's never fair to say like a food is good or bad. That's not a really good approach to have. It's just that food has these types of effects and these types of effects. These could be positive for one group and be very negative for another, and the same is true for this. So, environment has a huge role to play. Also, I'm from places like Oregon where, when it starts pouring down rain, that oftentimes keeps people indoors and creates like more sedentary lifestyles. Can I tell you guys, I was super blown away when I was driving around LA the first time, and I like drove past, I remember like driving past elementary schools and just being like, there's so many open fields. Like, they have so many yards and there's no cover. Like where I'm from, you have to have, you didn't go to the playground. You went to what we called it, called the covered court. And the covered court is a playground with a lid on it because it rains all the time.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I don't, to this day, I don't use the term playground all that often. I say covered court, and people are like, the what? So that's part of your environment. Other things, lifestyle, right? Lifestyle is huge, right? We are seeing increases in technological reliance is huge. Yeah, right? Irene, you're talking about like kids, iPads, right? Yeah. Absolutely, right? That's a big part of like lifestyle, right? Like family history is another one, etc. I think that it's really interesting when sometimes people, like here, we'll talk about genetic factors, right? Like a family or inherited genes.
But Brad, isn't genetic only about 5% or so, like less than 10% of, like with the disease and that sort of things that gets?
I'd say that's pretty hard I'd say that's kind of a hard thing to take a numerical stance on. I'm a little cagey about just saying 5% of things are genetic. However, like on the flip side, I totally think sometimes, like I've met with so many clients who are just like, yeah, I mean, like I just have a family, my whole family is like this, and I think it's just in my genes, and I'm kind of just resigned to the way that I'm gonna look. I've had clients like who have like weight. It's interesting because you'll have like they'll like come in with a weight loss goal, and then immediately like they'll almost abandon it because they get kind of frustrated really quickly, and they're like, they're like, they kind of saw, I want to make a change, so I'm going to hire a trainer. And then it's easier to accept that you can't succeed than it is to overcome, strife. And so like I'll get in there just like, well, it's just certain genetic factors. This is just how it is. And don't get me wrong, like I will you are not going to hear me say that genetics don't play a factor. Absolutely they do. But sometimes I think that, and we're going to talk about this later, actually, I think on another day's class, I think Mondays actually, they have done like your genes sometimes have less to do with your metabolic rate and more to do with just how your brain is programmed. Like they have bred mice, for instance, who like they'll track the number of minutes that a mouse spends on like a wheel or whatever. And then they find like another mouse and they're like, well, those two should date. And then they hook them up. And then like they have like super fit, active babies. And then like they will do the same. They'll breed them. And they've removed those kids from the parents. So it's not like they're seeing the parents get on like a wheel or anything, but they'll just find that those baby mice are just extremely active, just like their parents were. And so like there is some inherited gene instinct to be a very active person. Like I know that I get that from my dad's side for sure. Like my dad's side is like a whole bunch of people who are just beanpoles like me. I get my height from my mom's side. Most of the people on my dad's side are relatively short, but all of them are skinny. And then I've got like a mixture of my mom's genes, which, you know, that either explains my height or all the milk does, all the freaking hormones that I was drinking growing up. But then like on my mom's side, everybody tends to be a little more broad and a little overweight, right? That tends to run on my mom's side of the family. And so there's definitely like an inheritance of genes there. And my dad and I will drive my mom crazy because we're both like bouncy, like energetic sometimes. Like my dad and I are both pencil tappers, which drives my mom nuts. I'm like a foot tapper. I was just talking about this to this girl I was talking to yesterday, how like I've had yoga instructors come up to me and like place their hand on my shoulder or like on my forehead or like on my chest, where I will be like bouncing a leg during the meditation part, and they're just like, they'll come by, and I've had people literally just go, stop. It's like, ugh. And I guess I'm like throwing the energy off in the room or whatever. But I think that's just like, I think that sometimes is part of the genes that we're talking about. So I don't think, a lot of times like people, when they think genetic factors, they go straight to metabolism, but I don't think it's always metabolism. I think sometimes it's habits that you inherit, like visually and psychologically. I think sometimes like some of it is like programmed in your brain. Are you a runner? Are you a lifter? You know, like there's a reason you look at Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was extremely muscular before he ever got into weightlifting. They've got pictures of him when he was a kid, and he was just a muscular dude. So it makes sense that he would find his way to a place that, you know, relied on all that muscle. So it's definitely a factor, but I'm going to talk about this again later, so I'm not going to spend too much more time on it. But I think those are some of the genetic factors that we sometimes overlook. So it's like, you know what? I think it would, and I think this is really motivating, by the way. I think this is a really positive thing to think about, because it's like, we can accept now that maybe your metabolism isn't holding you back. Maybe it's just that you need a different type of motivating factor to get you excited, right? Maybe basketball wasn't your game, but golf is, you know, like it's like, you just got to find what you're actually interested in, and you can use that to your advantage. Like me, I love running, hate biking. So if I get the world's greatest trainer, the world's greatest spin instructor, who is the, you know, king or queen of motivating people for spinning, it's not going to have much an effect on me, because it's not playing to my already, you know, established likes. So one other thing we got to understand about obesity. So another thing that is absolutely important to understand, especially when we're talking about lifestyle and certain environmental factors, is weight control is an example of energy balance. This is another thing that we are definitely going to come back to. At the end of the day, if there is more energy coming in then there is energy going out, it will always result in weight gain, right? And if there is more energy going out than there is going in, then that will always result in weight loss. And if there is a balance, weight will remain stable. Now, that is sometimes hard to swallow if you've had like a personal experience with like a weight loss or weight gain journey. I know that like I have a hard time gaining weight sometimes. That is something that I used to struggle with when I was more into like bodybuilding and physique and things like that. When I had to have when I was real stingy about always having a six pack. Now I'm in my 30s, so 4-pack is fine. So like, that was very much I always had a hard time like maintaining enough muscle. And so I would track my calories extremely stringently. I would always pay very close attention and be like, I didn't get enough calories for today and I got to go to bed. And I'd go grab like a handful of walnuts or something and just eat them and be like, that was enough, hopefully. And then I'd be like, go to bed. But what's funny is like I would still get stagnant. And so it's like, what explains that? Why is it? I'm sure that I'm eating more calories than I was. So why am I not gaining weight? Well, is it my metabolism? Is it my genes? Or is it I've been giving myself all this new fuel, and now me and my bouncy self, I have been burning more energy because I got all this extra fuel to burn off. And so I'm programmed to burn all of that off. And last year, and it totally got actually at the beginning of this year, and it completely got ruined by COVID. But I was doing a really interesting experiment with myself where I was tracking. I was wearing my Fitbit 24 hours a day as often as possible, and I was using its calorie tracking. And what I would do is I would have a certain number of calories every single day, and then at the end of the day, right before I was about to go to bed, I would calculate however many calories I was going to burn for the remaining like 2-3 hours worth that there were like left in the day. If I was going to bed like 10 p.m., there were 2 hours left. I'd calculate that number. And so then I would get a total caloric burn over that 24-hour period. And what I was doing was I was adding 10%. And so like whatever that was, like let's say I burned 3,500 calories in a day, I would consume 350 calories beyond that. So I'd eat 3,850 calories every day. The next day I would do the same thing, and I was just doing a 10% surplus every single day for a full 8 weeks. And that came out to around 350 extra calories a day sometimes, but then there were days where I went to like a freaking ultimate frisbee tournament and had to eat like 6,000 calories in a day. No joke, that actually happened. And I literally was just like, all right, well, I'm going to go get a hot and ready pizza, and that's going to be my food. So I was like tracking it really strictly. And sure enough, like it was all very linear. All the math worked out exactly to the way it should have. Now, how much of it was like fat and how much of it was muscle tissue didn't exactly come out exactly as high I would have liked. But that could be due to a lot of different factors. It could have been due to the fact that I was burning so much energy, that it was overtraining. It could have been due to the fact that I have a predominance for type 1 muscle fibers, which just don't grow as fast. There's a lot of different factors at play there. But then I wanted to do the exact opposite version in a weight loss method, where I would also undershoot my calories, but then make them up at the end of the day with like one final meal. And unfortunately, COVID blew the whole thing up, because it's just really hard to like do that nowadays. But that's the thing, positive energy balance. And sure enough, it resulted in weight gain, and I had never tracked my calories that way before. I had never taken into account, I just assumed that every day was around the same number of calories, which is how, honestly, and that's actually how we're going to talk about it for the most part. So, there's going to be a grain of salt when we get there. But you do your calculator and it's like, you burn 3,200 a day, you burn 2,500 a day. You're like, great. All right, 25 plus this. But what I found is that like I had so much more energy when I would eat like that. And so I was creating a deficit still. I was making up for that loss. The exact same thing happens. A lot of people who will go on like a diet program will lose weight, and then they'll be on that low energy expenditure or that low energy intake for so long, they'll start to slow down and they won't move as much. And so they've done studies where people will actually burn less calories in a 24-hour period on days that they worked out rather than days that they didn't, which is insane. The whole point of working out is to burn all these calories, right? But what happens is people work out so hard and then they spend the rest of the day on the couch. They're wiped out. They go to work and rather than take the elevator, or rather take the stairs, they took the elevator because they're like, I worked out this morning. So they found that like your body will instinctively, they bounce their knees less. It's a pretty interesting, it's actually really fascinating how they did it. They literally put people on calories and then put them in this little apartment full of cameras. And they just observed them and they were like, look at how much that dude's sitting. He's watching TV. He was active the day before, but we had him work out today. It's pretty fascinating stuff. So we'll talk about that. Obesity has increased. We know that like if we look at the NHA-NES, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, from 2009 to 2010, that 70% of Americans were overweight or obese. 35% of those fall into that obese category. The more common way that we're going to see this, by the way, and actually I'm going to put this up here in the notes just because we're seeing about 1 in 3 Americans are obese. That's how you'll often see it. They won't say 35. A lot of times they're going to go, you know, what fraction of Americans, and so they'll give you like the 1 in 3 number. I've seen that one on a lot of tests. So technology is huge. We know that, like, I mean, it's also explaining, you know, the forward head posture that we see, the rounded shoulders we're seeing. We just see a lot of physical inactivity because, you know, you think about it nowadays, when you think about like what a washboard is, you know, when you hear the term like washboard, I think of abs. Like, because it's always tied to like, oh, the guy's got washboard abs, you know. Like, but like, if I ask my parents, they're like, yeah, it's the thing you scrubbed laundry on. And it's like, oh no, the laundry is the thing that you throw in, hit the button, and go watch Netflix. Like, laundry is the thing that you throw in and go to work and come back and pick up at the end of the day, if you don't mind the wrinkles. Like, that's an increase in technology. It's not just all about smartphones. You know, we see a lot of these increases. I don't have them anymore, but in my last apartment, I had smart light bulbs. And I literally, like, if I forgot to turn the light off, I could just do it from my phone without getting out of bed. Like, that's some technology. So we definitely know that that's a big one. We also know that food accessibility and marketing has been a big one. We show that, like, you know, we are constantly exposed to, you know, you're a manly man if you eat this giant meaty burger. You know, like, you're trendy and popular if you go get this super sugary coffee drink. You know, like, we're constantly exposed to all this marketing, and we have like more exposure to unhealthy foods, which are great from an economic standpoint. Like, you know, if you're a food company and you can make a food that's, you know, barely actually food anymore, and it can sit on a shelf for a couple of years, eventually it's going to get sold. Great, you did your job, right? You made some money. But it's not exactly like a nutritious thing. And so we're only seeing like 1 in 3 adults are getting fruit 2 or more times a day, and 1 in 4 adults are getting vegetables 3 or more times a day. Like, that's a pretty shocking statistic. We also see that, like, societal contributions, we've definitely seen social norms switch to, you know, technological reliance being more popular. You know, it is not as popular to go do something very active anymore when, you know, you can simply do something at home. You know, it's even dating. You know, we're living in the age of swiping for dates nowadays. Socioeconomic status is another one. Like, if you come from like you know, if you can't afford to eat healthy, a lot of times people think eating healthy is expensive. And ironically, eating healthy is actually relatively cheap in a lot of ways. Like, I eat 3,200 calories a day. I get my servings of fruits and vegetables in every single day. I spend about $80 a week on groceries. And that's all like lean proteins and stuff. But I sacrifice a lot of my time to cook all of that because it's a lot of raw, cheap versions of these foods, you know. And raw is great because I know exactly what's in my food, but it takes time. Like, I spend a good 4 hours every week meal prepping, you know. It takes usually about 2 Harry Potter movies. Or two Disney movies. And so, like, that's, you know, that's time. And if you are coming from, like, if you're working like a minimum wage job 40 hours a week, you know, it makes a lot of sense that you can stop and just pick up dinner for, you know, you can get 2 hamburgers at McDonald's for, I don't know, $3-4. I don't know. So summarizing chapter 1 and why our job needs to exist, right? The obesity epidemic has grown at an alarming rate. Man, it's really weird to say the word epidemic now in the world we're living in now. Like, I've taught this PowerPoint before, but it rolls off the tongue differently now. We've definitely seen obesity grow at an alarming rate, and it's obviously imperative that, you know, we have weight loss specialists, which is what this is, by the way. This is this class is PFT 110. All of these materials are based around NASM's WLS certification, so weight loss specialist. Okay, let's put this up here. So PowerPoint 2, which is health effects of obesity. Center that, 24. Yeah, stop it. So I'm going to move through this relatively quickly because you'll notice the second half of this title, exercise guidelines for comorbidities. These are all those common conditions associated with obesity, which you might remember is the last thing we talked about in our last course. So I'll definitely review them real quick, but we're not going to spend too much time on them. Also, we have a special populations class where we go into all of these things in depthly. So we're going to touch on it, but we're gonna move relatively fast. So next half of this PowerPoint, we're going to be able, after completing this section, we should be able to understand the different comorbidities that come with obesity, understand the effects that certain medications are going to have, and basic guidelines for working with those comorbidities. So we do know that like obesity is linked to several different conditions or diseases, commonly referred to as comorbidities. Right? And what a comorbidity is a health-related condition that has effects on daily normal living. So comorbidities, right? Like for instance, if you have obesity, you might suffer from arthritis because your joints are dealing with all this added pressure that they have to kind of deal with every day, and so your joints gradually wear down a little bit. That's a comorbidity. It's a condition associated with another condition. So in order to kind of identify these, a thorough medical history and medical clearance are very, very necessary, especially when working with extremely obese clientele. So make sure you are always, always, always doing a general medical history questionnaire as well as a PAR-Q with your clients. That way you can learn about any conditions that they might have and things that you might need to avoid. So this information that we're about to go into, it is not meant to be in place of a medical diagnosis. We are not medically treating any of these conditions. But again, going back to my favorite phrase that I've been saying a lot lately, because I just say it a lot in this mod, weight loss is a byproduct of an overall healthy lifestyle. So I am not here to treat someone's stroke, but I am here to help them develop a healthy lifestyle. And if developing a healthy lifestyle reduces their risk for stroke, hey, we got lucky. So it's a very roundabout way. That's why, I mean, you got to be a little cautious. I mean, you're never going to get in trouble when somebody puts words into your own mouth, but you'll constantly get clients who are just like, can you treat that? And I am like, you guys know me, I'm uptight. And so I'm always like, I can help in other ways, which will affect it positively. But like rarely will you hear me use the word treat these diseases. It's a distinction that's very small, but I don't know, it feels important. Ain't no lawyer ever getting their hooks in me. So type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, respiratory complications, certain types of cancers, dyslipidemias, and metabolic syndromes, all the things we were talking about earlier. However, also musculoskeletal issues. It is common to tear things, soft tissues and things like that, and depression as well. So first one we're going to go ahead and look at is going to be type 2 diabetes mellitus. I'm going to put the full name up there, diabetes mellitus. It's diabetes. Do not let that fool you. I know sometimes people get a little gun shy when they're taking their tests. Every now and then they're going to say diabetes. Every now and then they're going to say diabetes mellitus. Same thing. That's just the full name that we always tend to shorten. Diabetes is the colloquial version, I guess. This is going to be approximately 25.6 million people suffer from diabetes. And actually, you know what? I should put up here. Impaired glucose control due to the body developing a resistance to the hormone insulin. So remember, insulin's job is to lower your blood sugar levels by driving sugar out of your blood and into your cells. So if you are creating enough insulin, your body's going to do that, right? Now, if you have type 1 diabetes, your body doesn't make enough insulin. So then sugar stays in your blood and makes you ill and you get sick, right? In type 2 diabetes, insulin just stops working. It's like in the same way that I'm sure a cup of coffee doesn't do for you now what it used to, you know? I remember coffee. I remember how it used to make me feel when I was younger. But yeah, like that's like a difference. You need a bigger and bigger and bigger fix, right? The same thing is true of insulin inside of your body. Your body eventually becomes resistant to that. So 25.6 million people are going to suffer from diabetes. 90 to 95% of cases are type 2. And you know what sucks about type 2 diabetes, guys? It is a type that really should not exist. If we wouldn't spike our blood sugar levels so often, we wouldn't even really suffer from it. Like, if you have a bum pancreas, it makes sense that you're going to need insulin, right? But like, if you have a hard time making healthy choices, and again, I'm not blaming anybody, right? Like there are so many different factors at play here, environmental, genetic, whatever. But this is a practically preventable disease, which is why you'll hear of people who have like diabetes and then they'll get rid of it. Like it'll disappear. They didn't cure it. We don't have a cure for diabetes, but we can essentially get your levels back to normal, make your receptors responsive again, and then all of a sudden you don't need insulin anymore, which, you know, I'm not comfortable saying that that's a cure, but like, hey, it disappeared. You want to call it a cure? I'm not going to stop you. But like, that's the thing about diabetes here. So it's a disease in which the body does not produce or properly use insulin. And so insulin's job is insulin is a hormone created by the pancreas to facilitate the uptake of glucose from the blood to the body's cells. So type 1 diabetes, not enough insulin is being produced. Type 2 diabetes, the tissues don't work anymore. A lot of times when you are suffering when you are suffering from type 2 diabetes, you might end up with another comorbidity referred to as peripheral neuropathy. So one of the things that diabetes, like having excessive sugar in your blood, because that's the thing, it's like, wait, I'm supposed to have sugar in my blood. That's what gives me energy, you know, consistently. Yeah, you are, you know, but when there's so much sugar that it prevents your cells from being able to deliver nutrients like oxygen, it can kill your nervous system. It can literally suffocate it, and you will end up with nerve damage, which we're going to refer to as peripheral neuropathy. And so it is nerve damage that typically manifests itself in the extremities, particularly the toes and fingers. So this is where a lot of times, like if you have peripheral neuropathy, you might not be able to actually feel certain sensations. And so it can lead to like pain in the lower legs. It can lead to a loss of balance in the lower legs. And so one of the things that's so dangerous here about somebody who has peripheral neuropathy, you need to make sure that your clients who are diabetic have proper footwear, which sounds very odd. You're like, what do you mean proper footwear? It's like, it's really important to make sure that they wear the right type of shoes when they're working out. And that sounds like, how does that have anything to do with me as a personal trainer showing somebody how to like do squats and stuff? But you got to remember, like, you're in an environment where they're going to be jumping and running and doing this and that. And if they get a blister, right, which has happened, you know, I'm sure everybody in here has had a foot blister at some point, wore a pair of shoes that are too small, went hiking on the beach, whatever. If you get a blister, you feel it. It's a pain in the butt, right? It's like, ow, that hurts. Ow, it's rubbing. Ow. If you have nerve damage and you lose the sensation in your foot, you are not going to feel that blister. And so then maybe you don't see it. Maybe it's on the bottom of your foot, and then it gets infected, and then it leads to things like gangrene. Because diabetes also slows down how effectively like your other cells are working immune-wise, it does not heal as quickly, which gives it even more chance for infection. And that's how you can end up eventually with what's called a diabetic ulcer, which is literally a hole in your skin. And it's extremely dangerous. And one of the things that we need to be aware of. And so trainers should always ensure that their clients, diabetic clients, wear proper footwear when exercising. Footwear is not a word. Too simple.
Brad,
Oh, it's a.
is that for type 1 and type 2 clients?
Yeah, you can get it in type 1 as well, because it's still just the problem is the same, right? Too much sugar in the blood. Type 1 diabetics will definitely have like, you know, different manifestations of symptoms and stuff, but the issue is the same, right? Too much sugar in the blood. So yeah, it's definitely more common in type 2 diabetics, but it can happen with anybody.
So Brad, the insulin, is that like the middleman sort of? It's basically transports, or it carries the
Yeah, it triggers, it almost acts similar to an enzyme. It's a hormone, make no mistake. But it doesn't carry things, but it does trigger the reaction. So your nervous system, what the hell was that? I think I just swallowed a fly. Your nervous system or something is in charge of like controlling your body, right? Like my nervous system zaps my muscles in my hand to make me do this, right? Mm-hmm. My nervous system, and that's how your nervous system, it's a control system. Its job is to zap stuff to make stuff happen. Hormones are also a control system. That's also their job. But one of the things that's so difficult to understand about hormones is they work very differently. Like the nervous system creates action potentials by actually like, you know, triggering certain gates and things like that. But you have like stretch receptors, you know, and like when a tissue stretches, like a ligand gated like receptor might go, whoa, I'm being stretched. And so maybe that kicks off like a nervous system reaction. So then an action potential gets created, right? And electricity. Hormones kind of do the same thing, but they don't necessarily use electricity to send those signals. They use like receptor sites. And so you'll have a receptor site, which is like, let's just say it's shaped like this. And then I've got a hormone that can kind of fit into that slot. And when that fits, now it creates an action potential the same way your nervous system would. So your nervous system would just zap something kind of like a light switch. But a hormone is almost like, oh God, I used to know an analogy for this, and I just remembered it, and it was something that somebody said like, I feel it was like a decade ago. Your nervous system is like a light switch, and hormones are kind of like, oh, what are those things called on farms? Not windmills. The water mills. It's kind of like that. Like you open a gate and a bunch of water rushes in, and when it finally reaches a certain level, that flips something and makes it happen. And then that water flows somewhere else. And then eventually when the water levels are low enough, the gate kind of closes, right? It's like the friggin' Panama Canal. You know, that's kind of what hormones are like. I butchered this. It was a great analogy too, and I used to know it and it's gone. But like that's kind of, hormones are a very different way of controlling your body. This is why hormones are something you really don't want to mess with. This is why you'll hear me and anybody else who knows about it tell you to stay away from things like steroids. Because like hormones often also don't just like make a hormone and then it goes and affects the tissue. What's another weird thing about hormones is it's almost like there's a hormone hotline. Like this hormone will trigger the release of that hormone, which will trigger the release of that hormone, which will trigger the release of that one, and then it'll affect your tissue. That's why, like, when we start producing things like adrenaline, it takes so long for us to calm down. Like, you know, I'm sure everybody in this call has been in an argument with their, with their significant other at some point, and you've been like furious with them, and then they apologized. They reached out and, they recognized that they were wrong, and they said, I'm wrong and I love you still and I care about you. And you were still mad. You know why? Because that's a hormonal thing. Like, they stressed you out. And so then you were like, you should be over it. Logically, it's over. The moment has passed, yet you're still like, that's how hormones work. They're very, very slow. They're very intense and they're very slow. And that's why, like, when somebody cuts you off, you're mad for the rest of the trip rather than just getting over it. The moment's passed. That car swerved out of their lane and almost hit you. Oh, that's so scary. Moment's over. Yet you're still there like this for the rest of your drive. That's hormones. That's the ultimate oversimplification of hormones. But like essentially that's how they work. So, insulin's job is not necessarily to actually carry glucose, but it is to trigger these physiologic events to occur and cause a cell to go, oh, you know what? I am going to use that sugar and pull it out of your blood. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes more sense. So for the definition, uptake of glucose, it's from the blood, not form the blood, right?
Oh no, what have I done? That is an excellent question and means that I definitely wrote something wrong.
Uptake of glucose from the blood, not from the blood.
Sure it is. Thanks a lot, Microsoft Word. Okay. Thanks, Irene.
Okay. Oh, so when I saw that, I'm like, okay, so is that how insulin works? Because it's like the uptake of glucose from the blood to the body cells. So that's where I thought it was like.
Right. Well, you got to remember again, your blood is not necessarily like inside of all of your tissues, right? Your blood vessels are kind of like pool noodles, like stuff can travel through the hole of the pool noodle, but in order to like get into a tissue, it has to pass through those walls.
Right.
That's what insulin's job is to trigger that moving through the wall, like to get into the actual tissues. The blood is just running around, right? It's running through a series of vessels. And when it gets to an exchange site, it can drop stuff off or pick stuff up, but it has to be told to. So let's talk about how exercise is so good for this, right? Exercise has been shown, it increases blood sugar control. Exercise causes you to need so much ATP production because you're burning so much energy that, when you are exercising, your body's like, holy crap, I am going to use all that sugar. And so it pulls all that sugar in to produce ATP. That's really great. That's a big part of insulin's role as well, is to be like, hey, let's pull that sugar out of the blood and use it in the quad so we can get up this hill. That's great. But if you aren't going up a hill and instead you're sitting on the couch watching Saturday Night Live, instead what's going to happen is like insulin's going to come along and say, hey, let's pull that sugar out of the blood, and I can't put it in the quads. Let's store it over there as a fat cell. And so it'll do that instead. And so it'll convert it into something else because it has to go somewhere, right? So the more often you are exercising regularly, particularly intense exercise too. I love cardio, you guys know that, but like for diabetics, particularly glycolytic energy production rather than aerobic energy production has been shown to have a very, very positive effect on diabetes because sugar is the fuel source, right? That's what glycolysis is. So it increases your blood sugar control. It increases your sensitivity. Right? Remember, insulin, somebody who is producing in type 2 diabetes is somebody who's producing insulin, but their body is just not responding to it anymore. Their cells have become so resistant to it, they need a bigger fix. Well, when you exercise, your body starts using that insulin. And so it says, great, I got a reason to use all this stuff. And so it actually becomes more sensitive to it, which is excellent. And like I said, it can prevent or delay the onset of type 2 diabetes while also, improving your cholesterol, blood pressure, and increasing your overall quality of life. So this is a big one, but like these are kind of two that are directly related to diabetes there. Now, another condition that we are obviously going to see that is very, very common is just general heart disease, right? Good Lord. So heart disease, the leading cause of death in the United States among, you know what, among men and women? Yeah, leading cause of death in the United States. So it accounts for 25% of all deaths. That's crazy.
Wow.
Isn't that insane? That is a lot of essentially preventable. I mean, don't get me wrong. There is going to be the random person who has, you know, some type of congenital, they'll get most of their life without ever having a problem, and then all of a sudden that valve just wasn't connected properly because their body didn't assemble it the way it was supposed to, and it breaks, and sure enough, you know, there's gonna be heart disease no matter what we do. But like this is a very preventable disease, you know, through a healthy diet and lifestyle. And check this out, men are going to account for more than half of heart-related deaths. Now, I'm not going to go on record and say the cause for that, but you know, you look at other things that are also common amongst like the idea of what being a like manly man is, and it involves like eating lots of like red meats and things like that, which are very high in cholesterols and saturated fats, which are directly related to heart disease. We can start to track like where some of these things come from. So the most common of this is going to be coronary heart disease or coronary artery disease. Now, there's a lot of different types of heart diseases, guys. Your heart could grow, which is actually a bad thing. I mean, a lot of times we're talking about how good it is for us to grow muscles, and your heart's a muscle, but we do not want your heart to grow. We want your heart to remain the same size and get better at pumping and more efficient. If your heart grows, you know, that sounds like a good thing, but what that ends up doing is it actually pulls your valves apart, and then you actually lose the ability to generate pressure. So that can happen. You know, there might be like some type of other valvular disorder. There's a lot of different, there's fibrillation. There's a lot of different types of heart disease, but the most common and the most dangerous is going to be coronary heart disease, which is the narrowing of the blood vessels that supply oxygen to the heart. Okay, so all of your tissues need to be covered in blood vessels, right? That's how oxygen and blood gets to your tissues, right? And your heart is no different. I know it seems like, well, isn't it filled with all kinds of blood, so then it should be able to get its oxygen that way? That's not really what it's meant to do. There's not the right type of like receptors on the inside of the heart. The tissues around the outside of the heart, that's where it actually keeps those tissues alive. So you'll come out of the heart, and then it'll immediately wrap around and create this kind of webbing around the heart, which are all of your coronary arteries. Now, coronary artery disease is where when you have like excessive cholesterols running through your diet and things like that, and they start building up on the walls of your blood vessels, you end up with this material called plaque. This is going to show up teeth, isn't it? Yeah, it's not the right type of plaque. Gross. I'm totally immune to looking at normal body stuff, but the teeth stuff is weird. So this is end up what's happening, right? So you end up with like this buildup of fatty tissue, and now look at this. There's like so much pressure running through here. So now you've increased your blood pressure, but eventually remember, your blood cells are separate little structures, and if they all start to build up, they generally tend to clot. And now you get no oxygen delivery here. That flow completely stops. And now your coronary arteries can't actually deliver any of that oxygen to all of these tissues. So it's an incredibly, incredibly dangerous disease. It's dangerous whenever you can't supply oxygen to something. But like, you can live without a foot. You cannot live without your heart. So this often leads to what is called a myocardial infarction, or a big fancy way of saying heart attack, which is cell death inside of your heart. So another version of this is also going to be hypertension, right? Hypertension is going to be commonly referred to as high blood pressure. It is a blood pressure of 140/90 or higher. Normal blood pressure should be around 120/80. Okay, so if it's ever above 140/90, that is hypertension. This is often referred to as like the silent killer, because a lot of times people don't realize they have hypertension and it leads to a stroke or a heart attack or some type of heart failure or kidney failure out of nowhere. So like you've had these blood pressure problems for a long time, but you've kind of become so used to it that like your perception of that pressure problem isn't really there. You're like, this is just what it normally feels like. My mom has had blood pressure problems ever since she went on like a bunch of medications that kind of, my hometown used to be really dangerous. Like Astoria, Oregon's hospital was known for being filled with assassins, not doctors. It was just not where you wanted to take people. Like if we ever got sick, and this is just an attribute to like my parents being wonderful, caring people, but like not taking care of themselves. Whenever I got sick, we would drive to Portland. Whenever my mom got sick, she would go to Astoria's hospital. And sure enough, she was on so many medications at one point, it completely destroyed her kidneys and has led to blood pressure problems for the rest of her life, which is likely what, explains the heart attack that she had last year. So, this is definitely something that happens and you deal with for a long time. So my mom goes and has this very, very minor heart attack and they put a stent in, and she described it as like, it feels like somebody is blowing air, like fresh air into her heart, and it makes her heart race and it makes her kind of panic a little bit. She says it's a really uncomfortable feeling, but it feels like somebody's blowing it almost feels like there's too much air in her lungs, and it feels like she's breathing too much. And I'm like, no, Mom, that's what breathing is supposed to feel like. But you dealt with this for years and got used to feeling shitty. Sorry, pardon my line, I'm getting all mom sensitive. But like that's like what that sensation is. And I've heard my clients describe, like, you're gonna hear this again, trust me, in your careers. And so like that's oftentimes why this is called the silent killer, because you will deal with it for years without realizing it. It's kind of like if you ever just had a really busy week and stayed up too late, like over and over and over and over again, and then eventually you're just kind of like, I don't know, 6 hours of sleep is enough, I feel fine. Your brain will trick you into thinking you feel fine, but then you ever get that 8-9 hours of sleep that you're supposed to get, and then you're like, oh my God, that's right, I forgot about the color blue. Oh my God, I can see new. Oh yeah, the world's pretty. Yeah, that's your brain finally realizing, like, that's getting back to a neutral state. I don't care who you are. If you think you're doing fine with your 5 hours of sleep, that is your brain convincing you that it is, but that is not the case. I know, I'm guilty of it too, man. It's hard to get enough sleep. It's hard to do the simplest thing in the world. So it is often referred to as the silent killer because it causes so many other comorbidities slowly over time.
So Brad, technically your mom is breathing much better than she ever has been.
100%. Well, ever has since she started having blood pressure problems.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, not better than ever, I'm sure she was in great shape when she was younger, I'm sure. But yes, that is definitely.
Wow.
But it feels uncomfortable. She didn't like it. It's like, hey, talk to a smoker. They're like, oh yeah, I can breathe when they finally quit. It's an amazing moment. Now, not necessarily 100% part of coronary heart disease, but definitely part of hypertension is also a stroke. Stroke is a blocked cerebral artery that causes inadequate blood supply to the brain, causing brain damage. So coronary artery disease and stroke, basically, in a way, the same thing. You know, you blocked a blood vessel, oxygen couldn't get to a tissue, and that tissue died, right? In your heart, that's the pump that supplies oxygen everywhere. In your brain, it's the thing that controls your entire life. So in a lot of times when someone suffers from a stroke, stroke survivors will often have impaired motor skills, making certain exercises more difficult. Which sucks because, again, how do you cure something like this? Well, you can't really, but exercise is absolutely key. So risk factors are things like associated with hypertension, heart disease, diabetes, right? Diabetes often won't cause like a blockage or anything, but again, like it's a lack of oxygen delivery. Certain genetic factors and alcohol abuse can be another one, because that can also, honestly, like alcohol abuse is often associated with like hypertension problems. But again, you're putting materials that are taking up space for normal physiologic functions. Alcohol is really, it has no positive qualities, unfortunately. It's got a few probiotics in it, so there's that. But like, you know, it really doesn't have anything to brag about. I know that like we've all heard that statistic where it's like a glass of wine at dinner has been shown to like reduce your risk for diseases. That has for the most part been debunked. That like it's like it'll reduce your risk for heart attack or stroke and stuff because it's got resveratrol. Yeah, I mean it does have antioxidants in it. I'll give wine credit where it's due. But so do every vegetable. Uh, but
Didn't the winemakers come up with that whole?
they did, and it's actually a legitimate study that they really did do the study, but they cherry-picked data to make it look as if it was wine. Turns out the type of person who knows how to relax by enjoying life and having a glass of wine every day is the type of person who doesn't stress very often and therefore suffers from hypertension less often. So it's like, it's kind of like when they see, all right, so this is gonna sound like a touchy topic, but I don't mean it to be. It's like when you hear people say, oh, well, there's certain like individuals of like races who have, you know, higher bone density. They're just meant to be better athletes. It's like, no. You're looking at physics. When you have like darker colors absorb light and lighter colors reflect light. And because light is associated with how we get vitamin D, which is associated with calcium intake, it results in more bone density. It's not that the DNA is programmed to give one group of people more bones. We have the same DNA, you dummy. Sorry, it's 2020 and we're overly sensitive. So it's like, it's not a genetics thing, it's a physics thing, you know? That's like how you can, this is why like scientific studies can be read wrong all the time, you know? People look at like, yeah, wine and beer, having a beer at dinner is good for you. No. People who tend to have a beer at dinner tend to be very relaxed people. And when you are a relaxed person, you create less stress hormones, which creates less hypertension. It's not the beer, it's the person. If that makes sense to everybody.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. Again, it comes, we all share so much DNA. We are so similar, everybody. So when we look at these things, and so many people love to blame stuff on DNA and genetics and stuff, and it plays a factor to be sure, but like your upbringing and your environment has so much more influence on you, you know? We share like 99% of our DNA. All right. So I'm like getting into a Facebook argument with him in my head right now. from my redneck hometown. Let's look at respiratory complications. Respiratory complications.
Brett, quick question. Alcohol. Is that the only thing that affects every single cell in your body?
No. Sugar effects. That's actually most of what alcohol does. Is alcohol is nothing but like if we talk about like the two bad things, right? We're always talking about like how fat's bad for you. We're always talking about how sugar's bad for you, right? Both those things are true generally, but obviously there's great things that sugar does. There's great things that fat does, right? Alcohol is basically where you're just getting the worst of both worlds. Like what alcohol is it's a molecule of fat, and then like sugars in a certain arrangement, right? And your body like can't absorb it, and so it screws up all your processes because your body's like, I got the two bad things at this. Normally I can deal with one bad thing at a time. So it's very, very, this is why like it really doesn't like have any positive things, you know? No matter what you hear marketing tell you, for the most part, we are now finally pretty definitively able to say, look, there's no reason to consume alcohol, like at least from a health standpoint. You know, but it gives you confidence to talk to the opposite sex.
A whole other subject.
You don't need alcohol.
So does exercising.
Exactly, right? Yeah, you don't need alcohol. What you need is a book on confidence. You need what's that guy? Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. All right. So respiratory complications. We do know that carrying around excess fat can lead to additional work that must be done by respiratory muscles. So this can lead to a condition known as sleep apnea. So we can experience shortness of breath, exercise-induced asthma. So it's not a hormonal problem or a structural problem. It is just because it's difficult to bring in oxygen. So it feels very much like asthma, even though it's not asthma. And then we have obstructive sleep apnea, which is a sudden stoppage of breathing patterns when the body is at rest. So what happens with sleep apnea is somebody literally stops breathing. I mean, the whole point of sleeping, right, is to relax every muscle in your body. And this will happen, by the way, in bodybuilders as well. This isn't just something that is associated with obesity. This is just associated with having a heavy body. And it can be associated with like hormonal factors as well. I've known plenty of very thin individuals who have had sleep apnea. So it can be hormonal, but like if you create too much paralyzing hormones, like you're supposed to be paralyzed when you sleep. If you create too much of that stuff, sometimes you'll relax too much and all of a sudden your whole body will kind of stop breathing, and all of a sudden your body will need oxygen, and some part of your brain will go, hey, we need oxygen. And all of a sudden it'll trigger a super intense contraction. So somebody will go, and it's like this really intense sudden intake of breath. That's very scary. And it disrupts your sleep, which often causes you to create stress hormones, which causes you to gain weight, which then causes you to have more sleep apnea. And it's a pretty vicious cycle. Anybody in here know anybody who has ever had sleep apnea? It's not insomnia. It's not I have trouble falling asleep. What's that?
My dad used to have it.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Did he get rid of it? Does he have a CPAP machine anymore?
Or? No, he just lost all this weight and then it stopped.
Yeah, my brother too. My brother was really big, 5'5", and like maybe pushing almost 300. And he started juicing. He started like making his own juices, I guess.
That's like a nearly did.
He lost a lot of weight, yeah.
Good on him. I love it. 2 success stories. I love that. That kind of crap makes my day. I just get so excited. That's awesome. I mean, look at like, again, like we're seeing in real time, right? Like that's a great story, both of those, about like how, you know, it's not always about how you look. It's about like having an improved quality of life. That's the key thing we're looking for here. Sleep apnea, sudden stoppage of breathing patterns when the body is at rest. We will also see certain types of cancers. Certain types of cancers have been shown to be linked to obesity. So particularly colon, breast, kidney, and esophageal cancer. Let's see if I can get this right. Nope. Oh, I didn't. Nah, I still would have gotten it wrong. Esophageal. Biology teacher, not an English teacher, not a math teacher. So all of those are very, very common. What we are going to see is we're going to see 1.5 to 3.5 times as likely to develop certain types of cancers compared with individuals of normal weight. So big thing we got to remember is, I mean, we were just talking about free radicals the other day when we were looking at physiology, but one of the things you got to remember is, again, like once something enters your body, it's there forever. Typically, your body will store stuff in your fat tissue. That's like the best place to store stuff. So your adipocytes will often hold on to dead versions of, you know, bacteria that your body has like eliminated, maybe even like a virus or two. But a lot of times it's just certain materials that somehow get into your blood. They'll oftentimes just get stored in fat tissues. And your body can, you know, fat tissue can store vitamins and minerals and stuff. This is why like you don't go vitamin deficient like that. So, you know, it's not just fat that's going to be held in adipose tissue. But the problem is if it's like, let's say an artificial sweetener, maybe it's like a type of plastic, right? Let's say you microwave something like in a styrofoam container, and you know it melted the styrofoam, and you're like, how bad could it be? And you still consumed it, right? Well, the thing is, like, for the most part, your body's not designed to eat styrofoam. It doesn't really know how. It doesn't have the tools to absorb that. So for the most part, it's going to pass right out of you. But let's say some of it doesn't. Some of it somehow gets into your tissues, right? Your body's like, I don't know what is, I don't know, put some cells around that. You know, like that's your body's like reaction. It's like, it's like, I don't know, just cover it up. I don't know what it is. And so it'll just kind of cover it in different types of like fat cells. And now you got to remember that that material is made up of atoms, which have electrons, which might start interacting or reacting with the outside environment around them, which is going to be your body's tissues. And so then all of a sudden it starts modifying your DNA, and you end up with some cells that are copying themselves imperfectly. And then you end up with like a growth of cells that aren't really doing anything. And then that growth starts to attack your own tissues. And that's kind of what we're describing here when we describe certain types of cancers. That's what we call like a malignant neoplasm. And so it's a very, you know, dangerous thing, and it's associated with obesity because like you have more opportunities to store all of those materials in those tissues rather than getting vitamins and antioxidants to those free radicals to possibly stabilize them. So that's definitely one of the reasons we start to see that. And colon cancer is a really big one, because, and this is why like a high fiber diet is so important. Colon cancer is technically a type of cancer that in a lot of ways is occurring outside of your body, right? Go back to the human donut analogy, right? And so like that's a cancer that, you know, it's almost like you can scrub that out of you. You just need to consume enough fiber in your diet. But again, we love our red meat. So next one we've got is dyslipidemia. Dyslipidemia, or high cholesterol, right? So this is an increase total cholesterol and triglyceride concentrations, right? So we're going to see our two types of cholesterol we've got. We've got our high density lipoproteins, right? This is often, that's our HDL. This is often thought of to be our good cholesterol, right? Its job is basically, it cleans out our blood vessels. It actually kind of goes around vacuuming out any leftover lipoproteins. So if we don't want to end up with plaque on the blood vessels, we can consume some HDL cholesterol, some things that are high in HDL cholesterol, and that can kind of clean that out in a really positive way. We've also got low density lipoproteins, or LDL cholesterol. I like to call it, this is your bad cholesterol, I like to call it lazy density lipoproteins, because it basically likes to take a nap on the inside of your blood vessels. Right? Often causes plaque and, to build up on the walls of blood vessels. Now, if that happens in your coronary arteries, that's how we end up with coronary artery disease. So we do know that physical activity has been linked to an increase in your high density and a decrease in your low density, because your body is going to use that high density to carry fat molecules for energy production. So it's like, hey, fat molecule, I need fat. That's great, perfect. And it's going to scoop it up and recycle it and use it for like energy. So that's one of the reasons we love high density lipoproteins so much. And what we've seen is, I love this, losing as little as 5 to 10 pounds has been shown to reduce overall cholesterol levels. That's amazing, right? That's a very small, percentage. That can be done in 5 to 10 weeks for a lot of people, and it can reduce your risk for certain types of diseases. Okay, so now the big new one. We have been reviewing a lot of diseases that we've already talked about, but now we've got to talk about Syndrome X, which is scary sounding. It sounds like an anime villain. But what this is metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome, commonly referred to as Syndrome X. I'm just gonna do the same thing here. It is several cardiovascular diseases in combination. So here's where, and I've talked about this before, but where if a person has an extreme amount of like abdominal obesity, it starts to act very weird. Like that fat is not an organ, right? It's not, it's just a type of tissue, but there's so much of it, it starts to act like an organ. So like, just really quickly, like a basic review of like our levels of organization, right? You have chemicals, chemicals come together to make up cells, cells come together to make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up systems, systems make up people, right? Well, when you have like enough tissue, particularly fat tissue, it starts to act in really, really weird ways. And that's how we end up with metabolic syndrome. Here's actually a very pretty interesting question. Maggie, you said your brother had lost like a lot of weight, right? Did his skin clear up when he lost weight?
Yes.
Like, did he used to have, particularly like around the arms a lot of times,
Yeah,
he had, like a lot of red
heat bumps or red like bumps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is a symptom of metabolic syndrome. So what's happening there? I don't know. We don't really know. It's your body's immune system is like, look, clearly something is wrong. And so then your immune system's like, attack, fight something. I don't know, anything, take it out. And so it starts to attack like its own tissues, and it manifests itself in these really weird ways. You'll get heat rashes. You'll get high cholesterol problems. Your body will destroy good cholesterol for no reason, right? And so it's a very, very dangerous, very interesting thing. And this is where, you see a lot of like inflammation. You'll hear people will complain about their joints hurting, right? There'll be what's called a pro-inflammatory state. They might end up with just blood clots out of nowhere. Their blood will start clotting as if they were cut in response to being severely obese. Because your body is just like, something's wrong. I'm not functioning the way I'm supposed to, right? And so it results in hormonal imbalances, a lot of different things, and you know, a lot of things can cause this too. If you end up with a hormonal imbalance, that can even cause metabolic syndrome. You know, it happens with age. Sometimes people just start manifesting symptoms out of nowhere. You know, they've been overweight their whole life, their weight hasn't changed, and all of a sudden, like a light switch, they just start suffering from problems. It's a very interesting condition. This is why we refer to as syndrome X, because it's like, well, what are the symptoms? And it's like, I don't have a good answer for you. A lot of things. Feeling crappy, I guess, you know? So that's a really big one there. Are we not going to get to depression? We're not. I'll talk about depression for just really quick. So depression is also definitely associated with obesity, right? So depression is a lot of times like very misunderstood. A lot of people think like depression is like, oh, that person's like sad all the time. That's not what depression is. Depression is not feeling sad. Depression is your emotions are depressed. They are essentially it should be called suppression. That's a much better way to talk about it, because essentially it's not just that you feel sad, it's that you feel nothing. You feel numb. And so it's like there's no good, but there's also no bad. And like sometimes bad is good. Like we like, you know, I love watching a movie that makes me like, you know, it's a real tearjerker. I love that. Because then my body makes all these like really positive endorphins afterwards. And I'm like, yeah, man, like you go, Professor Snape, you know? So I'm going like a Harry Potter marathon tomorrow. So I'm talking a lot about Harry Potter tonight. Like, you know, those moments are great. And when you have depression, like you don't feel those things. And what it is, it's a neurotransmitter problem, right? It's a problem where, you know, these neurotransmitters that are running around in your brain to make you feel certain emotions can't, right? Like they can't. Like whether it's because of obesity and your immune system is destroying them, or maybe they're having trouble flowing or whatever, it disrupts your ability to have those neurotransmitters bind in the way they're supposed to, and it results in your brain getting sick, right? And that's really a lot of times where we see, and it's not just depression. There's a lot of like, there's anxiety, there's anger issues, there's a lot of things that are associated with obesity that we definitely want to be aware of. Now, we don't treat any of those things, again, like as trainers, right? But we do put somebody in a scenario where they experience stress, which sounds bad for somebody who's dealing with a condition like this. Maybe they have anxiety and we're putting them in a scenario where we make them stressed. That sounds weird, right? But what happens is a very controlled type of stress that they're actively participating in. And what that does is that creates like positive anti-stress hormones afterwards, you know? They have looked at the brains. One of the things you also have to remember about like hormones is that this is still controlled by your nervous system. All your hormones are. Your hormones are their own separate control system, you know, like nervous system controlling things, but like the nervous system tells the hormonal system to kick things off with your hypothalamus. And if you are the type of person who like stresses regularly, they've looked at people like that. They've looked at their brains, and the part of your brain that, you know, hormones are juices, right? They're literally like goo that runs through your body. So you got glands that secrete those hormones. Well, if you strengthen those glands and you start squeezing more and more and more of them out, it can be, you know, it literally changes your brain's chemistry. And that's why stress is so bad for us, and why, you know, they've done really interesting looks at like, you know, they've looked at, they've done these like fascinating studies where they've just looked at like people in other countries who work 4 days a week, 30 hours a week, and they live longer, they make just as much money, they're more motivated at work, the companies make, it's interesting stuff. And it's literally, you know, it's easy to track because you can just look at their brain on an MRI and like, yeah, the thingy that squirts all the stress juice, that thingy's smaller. That's pretty easy to observe. You know, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a physiologist to understand that. So we do know that that's associated. I'll take this out because it's not in the PowerPoints, but that's definitely something that is associated with obesity. And lastly here, we also have musculoskeletal issues, right? It can be joint stiffness, decreased range of motion, tendonitis, ligament sprains, etc. There's a million different conditions here. Your body not being able to move the way it was designed to move. I mean, this isn't even always just an obesity issue. We constantly talk about, you know, how posture is so important, right? And when it comes down to like obesity, I always tell people this. You know, I used to love this. My friend Rebecca and I would have to do this like one lecture. We would not a lecture, but we would introduce ourselves when all the guests would get to the resort every week. So we get like 80 people in a big room together, and we'd all the trainers would introduce themselves like, I'm so and so, and I would always stand next to Rebecca, who was like a personal friend of mine, as well as my coworker, and she would always throw this phrase in where she'd be like, so I'm here to teach you guys all about like dieting and this and that, you know, because you can't out exercise a bad diet. And all the trainers, we'd like glare at, you know, we'd be like, yeah, we can't dispute that because that is very true. But eventually I started like going after her, and then I would go, and you can't out eat bad posture. And it was like my like little jab. But it's true, right? Like in most cases. However, in extremely obese clients, your posture could be caused by that obesity. And so, you know, it's causing rounding, it's causing low back pain, it's causing arching, it's causing all these things that cause like our musculoskeletal issues, which take you out, keep you from exercising, then you're sedentary, and it feeds right back into obesity. The biggest of which is going to be low back pain. This is going to be the most common. The most common musculoskeletal injury people deal with. 80% of the population will have chronic low back pain at some point in their life. 80% of all people. That is a lot. It's about $120 million in lost, you know, revenue every year. There's a lot of reasons to get rid of all this stuff. So we've definitely beat that horse into the ground. You know, we've talked about why it's so important to kind of work against these different conditions. So being overweight and obese have been linked to several debilitating diseases, and those symptoms can very, very, very much be improved through healthy diet and exercise. So that is what we're going to spend the rest of this course talking about. You guys are introed. Do you have any questions?
No.
Nothing?
Nope.
All right, Irene, it's good to have you back. By the way, for everybody in here, Irene is rejoining us. We were back. I got to teach her in real life.
That's right.
Yeah, you're one of the few, man. We're about to hit a full freaking cycle at this point, which if you would have told me that 6 months ago, I would have never believed you. I would have never believed you. I'd have been like, no. People are smart. We'll get over this. So anyway, well, if you guys don't have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and let everybody off of here tonight. I'm going to be sending a big old email. I might have to send 2 emails tonight because, you know, the PDFs they always take up a lot of space. And I'll attach the day by day on there because I always forget that. But I'm going to say it out loud now so that I don't. And that'll have you guys' schedule and stuff. And I hope you guys all have a great weekend.
Alrighty. Thank you, Brad. Have a good weekend.
Yeah, you too. Maggie, do you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you back.
Thanks. Nice to see you.
Yeah.
Have a
you too.
good weekend. Bye-bye.
All right. See you later, guys.
Oh, Brad,
Oh, yes.
I was, is the class gonna be online for like the next few months, most likely? Or are we just kind of taking it on a weekly basis?
You know, I've been I have been answering a version of this question for so long now, and I mean, I think you know this about me. Like I tend to struggle with half truths. I'm not a very I really don't like being wrong, and I really don't like not saying accurate information. So for a long time they were like, yeah, we're gonna come, you know, we were having these meetings and we are like, well, everything's looking good, we got that, we even cleaned the whole freaking facility and got ready and prepared, and then all of a sudden things shut down again. And
Oh,
so, like, I at this point am just, we're gonna observe it, we are gonna come back as fast as we can, that's what I'll say.
no, this is sort of working out for me right now.
Yeah, some people have actually had a pretty good time.
Okay. And the other thing, if like next week, Monday and Wednesday, I know I cannot be in the morning class. Do I need to tell you, or do I just
No,
kind
no, no, no. You're on the group thread. I'm gonna text you every day. You're gonna get
Okay.
you're gonna get the text no matter what. So we'll see. You can see it when you see it. You can join when you can join.
Okay. And my last question, did they clear out all our lockers, or are things still, do you know anything about?
They shouldn't have yet, although I would say, God, if you can do it, I mean, as early as possible this week, that'd be a pretty wise plan, because we're making some big changes, and that is time sensitive. So I would say if you can get up there as fast as you can, that's a pretty good idea.
Okay. The guy who was in charge, the quiet guy, the guy who's got very Manny is
Manny / Victor, one of those two.
okay. They're the guys who are in charge of the lockers, right?
Yeah, those are the ones you're gonna want to talk to.
Okay. And did we get any other materials for, because I remember at the time, at the end of February, we were supposed to get another set of.
We definitely have. I'm just not sure which ones you have and which ones you don't. So we'll have to like compile a list and figure out what you need, and then we'll
Oh,
get it to you.
okay. All right. But try to get out to school. Somebody's going to be at school like during the
Oh,
weekday.
for sure. Yeah, we're gonna be there like crazy this week.
This following week.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. This is good. Oh, I feel much better like being live, like in person with you.
Oh, totally. It's so
This
much
is,
better.
yeah. All right, Brad. Thank you.
All right, Irene. See ya.
Okay. All right. Are you playing Frisbee tomorrow?
No, that's all shut down.
Oh shit! Oh yeah. Oh my God.
Haven't played in months.
Damn, your body must be itching.
Oh, it's killing me.
That's why you're doing Hike Up the Hill.
Yep, exactly.
I see. Okay. All right.
All right.
Have a weekend.
You too. See you later.
All right. Thanks, Brad.
Bye.